Hi, my name's Jesse. I'm the Managing Director here at Horizon Digital. Thanks for joining in and checking out our interview series around technology and leadership and people working in tech. I'm really excited to be able to talk to a whole range of people, cover a whole range of different topics. And for this first one, we're going to be covering cybersecurity. So I've got Kane. Kane's one of our senior software developers, but also a strong interest in security. Probably you might call him a hacker, but a hacker for good, not for evil. So we're going to go through and talk to him about some things around, what are the common things hackers are looking for, how are they getting into your systems, and what can you do as a business and as an organisation to try and prevent those. So it's pretty topical. There's been some big ones recently. Medibank, Optus are probably the most public ones. They've had some pretty big data breaches, but there's a lot that you don't see that don't make the news. Those ones made the news because of the size and scale and the sensitivity of data. So it's something that all organisations can be vulnerable, and so we're going to sort of cover what you can do to address that and make sure the organisation's safe. So, Kane, thanks for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
It's actually pretty funny that you're the first guest on the interview series.
I'm the first
one, because we started working together about 13 years ago, I think.
Something like that, yeah.
And I joined a digital agency, which was also building like a tech startup. I had no background in technology, no background in software dev. Kane was one of the devs, one of the only devs there. You must have been young. You must have been like early 20s, I'm guessing.
I think I was like 19 when I first joined.
Pretty, yeah, there you go. And yeah, I'd sort of come from, more of a business government background, so I had to rely on Kane a lot to teach me about software dev. So, and then here we are 13 years later, Kane's working for us again. And, when we were working together originally, Kane was pretty young, he was pretty shy. You wouldn't say anything unless someone spoke to you.
And now here we are on a podcast.
Yeah, now you're on a podcast. So look how things change. So look, first thing I just want to start with was, before we talk about, cybersecurity, is like, just tell us a bit, how did you get into software dev? Like, when did you start? What got you interested? How did you go from there?
It was the hacking side of things, I guess, that got me into software development.
Yep.
So that was like, I think around 13, 14, something like that.
Yep.
I don't know where I got it from, but an interest in hacking, whether it was like TV shows, movies, Hollywood,
Yeah,
it just seemed fun.
Like just going to the screens and just pulling out some bank codes
cool.
or something.
Yeah, there's probably something on the news, some company getting breached or whatever.
Yep.
And it sounded fun, sounded interesting. So I went to Google, of course, and put in something like how to hack.
Yep. What did it come up with?
There was like some like useful websites where you could sort of sign up, create an account, and they like gamify it. So you have like challenges ranging from very basic things like just viewing the source code, like the HTML source code of a website, and finding like a password in the comment section, to like mocked up, fully blown websites like a WordPress type mock up that have purposely put in vulnerabilities where you'd have to find them.
So so it's a game, you go in.
That's it. You sort of go through the basic ones up to the more challenging ones.
Mm.
So that's where I started learning, and you can only get so far when you're trying to like learn to hack,
Yeah.
So like something like an SQL injection, right? Which is like nowadays it should be unheard of, but back then they were very popular. And it's in order to exploit like an SQL injection, it's a simple thing to find. We just chuck like a comma in, right? So like playing with it was simple enough, but actually trying to do something with it, you could only get so far without actually knowing SQL.
Yeah,
so you'd be forced to learn SQL, exactly.
Yeah.
And then like PHP websites, a lot of those challenges were like PHP websites. So I'd often sort of just like Google for hints if I get stuck. And they'd say, you got to exploit this sort of PHP functionality.
Yep.
So you'd have to learn how that functionality worked.
Yeah, okay.
So my learning to program came from my interest in learning to hack.
Yeah, right. And what was your intention around learning to hack? Just for fun?
Just for fun, yeah.
Never wanted to do any evil with it?
No, it's too risky.
Yeah. So if these things are out there and people are learning to hack just from Googling stuff and playing games, like, so where's the line between people who are doing it for the wrong purposes and people who are doing it just for trying to keep things safe and secure?
Like for me, I suppose like fear's got to play a role. Surely, like it's almost like doing a Sudoku. You know, it's a challenge. It's just a fun thing to do. That's where I have my interest in it.
Yep.
So I'll just poke around something for fun to see if I can try and break it. You know, and if I can, it's like it's cool. I did it.
Yep.
But to go further than that, to like delve into the crime side of things, well, there's a bit of a risk in that, isn't there?
Yeah,
so I'm not interested in playing with that.
So so you started when you were about 13. You realised you had to learn to code just to get through some of these challenges and learn more about hacking. So how did that evolve into starting to work as a software developer?
Well, I guess I knew, like I'd heard of, you get companies to do like penetration testing, right? So you have like, I think they call them like red teams and stuff, where the whole purpose of the company is to be hired by another company to try and break in. And if you can, you tell them how you did it. So that always sounded cool. But being in Perth, I don't know how many of those companies existed, and trying to like Google that sort of stuff when I was, I don't know, like 17, 18 or something, I didn't find too many results.
Yep.
So I thought, okay, I'll try the software side of things. It's still in the same, I learned to program doing all this stuff, so I like it. It was fun. So I ventured into the programming side of things, and there was a lot more companies looking for software engineers than there were companies looking for penetration testers.
Yep.
That's the path I took.
So when you got into software dev, right, so you didn't have any formal qualifications.
No.
So tell us, and I know the story, but tell us how you got in. You got your first job in software dev. Maybe just leave names out of it. But
I won't mention the company.
What was the process? Because it's most people who get into software dev, they finish school, they go to uni, they get a computer science degree or something like that. But you took a sort of different path to getting into software dev.
Yeah, well, I guess like nowadays you have things like GitHub, where you can, without some formal education, some formal degree, you can still put up hobby projects and show your ability to code, right? Yep. You can still show things off. Back then, there wasn't really, there was probably, I think SourceForge existed, but it was nowhere near as popular as GitHub is today.
Yep.
Especially in terms of like adding it to a resume, I think, from my perspective. So I needed something to stand out, I guess, to show off. I'm, a kid from high school, but I can code. So my path was I found a company looking for developers and sent in a resume, but at the same time I went to their website to just try and hack it, So looking for vulnerabilities, just sitting there going through their public website, and got lucky. I found something. It was like a remote file inclusion vulnerability, like one that's a common vulnerability in PHP applications, common-ish, But that led me to be able to execute code on the server. So it's a simple like demonstration of I did this. You can't just say I can do it. I wanted to show that I did do it.
Yep.
There's some sort of proof. I just sort of like catted on Linux. You have like the /etc/password. And as the name suggests, it's a password file. You can't really do much with it, but it's at least some sort of file from their host to show, look, this is from your computer, right?
Yep.
So that got me the interview. They were impressed. I said, look, I hacked you. I want to work for you.
Yeah.
So he said, yeah, come on in, have an interview. And I guess part of my brain was thinking, is this like a sting operation?
Yeah, there you go.
But I was like, I'll roll the dice.
Yeah.
So I went in, and he was like, he was impressed with what I did. He was happy to have a chat. But then he went down the path of where we prefer uni graduates, not so much because it shows off your skills, but it shows off that you have the ability to study for, I don't even know what uni is, 4 years or something, right?
Yeah.
You can stick dedicated to something for that time period. So that's why they preferred the
even though you'd been dedicated to hacking for probably 5 or 6 years by that point.
Yeah, I wasn't too argumentative with him on that point. So I was like, yeah, fair enough.
And it was a pretty public website.
Yeah. I mean, you'd heard of it.
Yeah. So what are some of the things you see, like come to like present days, and that was like 12 years ago, something like that.
Yeah.
So what are the common things that you see in terms of security and trends and trends with hacking? What are the things that are out there that people should be aware of?
In terms of things like websites, uh, nothing really. There's no new technology, I don't think, where there's like a brand new clever exploit coming out in terms of like website services, web apps. On the 11th of October, I think it is, there's a popular library called curl. That's libcurl, right? It's for making HTTP requests. There's probably lots of websites on the internet that utilize this, like libcurl, to make HTTP requests. If you think of like an image upload service, you can either upload from your computer or you can paste the URL, right? And the website will take your URL, download it on your behalf. So if that uses libcurl, which is a very popular library, on October 11th, they'll be releasing a new update with to address a high severity issue that's recently been discovered. And they say it's going to affect the last few years of versions worth of curl and libcurl. So that's an old program that's been around forever. But a brand new exploit is going to come out on October 11th to attack, which will attack people who don't update their servers.
So is that the most common way that you get into systems is through outdated libraries or deprecated libraries, things that are end of life and haven't been updated and maintained?
I think it's a common way for companies to be hacked. Personally, like I do it when I look at someone's website. It's not because I'm doing it to. I'm not getting paid. It's a hobby, and it's just something I do for fun. I want the challenge, So I'm not necessarily looking for a shortcut to get into someone's website, but other people might be if they're motivated by different reasons. So you have databases, public databases of every known sort of exploit, publicly available exploit to different versions of software.
Yep.
And you can have people who just write scripts that'll target any and every website they can find to see if they are running this particular version and just automatically exploit it. So a lot of companies will be hacked by these sort of drive-by exploits.
Yes, and they're not particularly looking for, they're not going to, hey, we want to hack Medibank. They're just looking on the internet for vulnerabilities, and if you just happen to come up, then you might get exposed.
Like we recently moved to a new area and signed up to a new GP, right, to take my daughter to a local doctor. And on their website, they had a big notification saying within the last few months they had a data breach, and to be aware if you were an existing client. Fortunately, we're a new client, probably in the best time to sign up after they paid professionals to secure things. To be warned that your information has been possibly obtained by hackers. I would assume it wasn't actually obtained by hackers. Again, I would imagine it was some sort of drive-by exploit. And in a lot of these cases, the hackers don't really care about the data because they're not targeting you. They're just targeting everyone they can find, right? That's where ransomware comes into play, where a drive-by exploit will find you, exploit you, and just encrypt whatever data it can find, whether it's a database, your code, anything and everything on the server. And then you get the notification saying, pay us X many Bitcoin, or your data will just forever be encrypted. If you want it back, you got to pay us.
So I guess, if that's what these, the sort of the black hat hackers are out there doing, like you might think, hey, our company, no one cares about it, or no one's going to be looking for it. You're not as public or whatever, but it doesn't really matter. That's what I'm hearing, right? Is that like, if you're out there and you've got some vulnerability, if someone finds you, they'll just try to exploit it whatever they can.
That's it. Yeah, I mean, you'll either be a big enough company where people might target you specifically, and people will look through your own written code to find vulnerabilities and spend the time doing it. Or you can be some little business in the middle of nowhere no one really cares about, but you happen to be running an old version of some dependency, and a drive-by exploit, when someone's scanning the internet, will find you among with everyone else and automatically exploit you, and that's your data potentially locked up unless you're willing to pay.
So what are the sort of things that typically happen? So if you got hacked, someone got into your system, got your data, like what are the consequences? What are the things that they're trying to do or try and get out of you?
Well, from what I seen, just occasionally, reading news and updates and this sort of stuff out of interest, it's like the drive-by ransomware attacks, where it's an easy way to get paid. Like if you think in terms of, if you hack a company, you can maybe try find like specifically look through this one company's database to try and find credit card information or something, or personal information you could maybe steal for things like identity theft,
Yep.
which can lead to credit cards, money, right? Or you can look for ways to just target anyone and everyone with these drive-by attacks. And in order to get money out of those people, I think the most common and easy way to do it is just encrypt whatever data you can find and hope they don't have backups.
Mm-hmm.
And if you target, or luckily target in this drive-by exploit, a company that has some sort of valuable data, at least valuable to them, they might be willing to actually pay the ransom to get that data back.
Yep. Okay. So what are the sort of things that, if you're a leader, a tech leader in a company, what are the things you should be doing to try and protect yourself and make sure you're not vulnerable to these sort of attacks?
I guess you do have the two areas of attack, right? You have the target, where someone's specifically looking for you, and the sort of drive-by attacks.
Yep.
So if you're being targeted specifically by a hacker, I mean, you just need to make sure you have competent developers, I guess, who know how to at least do their best,
Mm-hmm.
have some sort of idea of how to write secure code, maintain secure services.
But even in that situation, I think you see, you might build something, the dev team moves on,
yep.
and then that code hasn't been touched for years,
yep.
It hasn't been updated or maintained. That's when it starts to become vulnerable, right?
It's like this curl example. So like years later, you could potentially, 3 years ago, you might have released a service that you thought at the time was perfectly secure, but you happen to be relying upon this version of libcurl that an exploit might come out on October 12th. And
open source library, which you don't really maintain, you just use it in your application.
So like on that, for one, you need the staff to make sure that your own code is written well.
Mm-hmm.
And then in terms of any and every dependency you might have, whether it's if you're writing, if you have a WordPress website, do they have plugins? If any sort of CMS might have plugins, right? So you're using someone else's code. The WordPress itself would be, I imagine, incredibly secure. I think it powers the majority of the internet.
Mm.
So the core team of WordPress deliver a secure product, but you can install any plugin you want.
Mm-hmm.
You just happen to be Googling for how to implement some sort of functionality, you install the plugin. So you need to then hope that plugin is secure and stays secure. And there are ways like, I know like with GitHub, right? If you happen to have a GitHub account, you host your code on GitHub, whether it's publicly or privately, they have things like, it's called like a depender bot, where you can have a manifest of the code, the plugins, dependencies, everything you use in your service. And this depender bot automatically checks the news, to see if updates are available for plugins, whether it's severe updates or low impact updates,
mm-hmm.
and they'll automatically open pull requests. And if you have a decent CI set up to automatically run unit tests, then you should be able to see pretty easily if simply updating that plugin is going to break something or not. So it can make maintaining and updating plugins and dependencies as simple as clicking accept pull request.
Yep.
And then of course you have the OS level updates, where you just need to make sure you're updating your underlying operating system,
mm-hmm.
or in the event of like a Docker container, you need to make sure that container's image itself is updated and kept up to date.
I mean, the other one I've seen a bit of is just like APIs that are open, and somehow you found those and you've got access into the system. I mean, how does that sort of come about?
Yeah, I mean, it's like I think the big Optus hack that happened months back, I think it was this year, right?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. From what I understand, that wasn't like an advanced, clever hack. Someone just found an API that when hit, it just simply returned the information.
Mm.
So that sort of comes back to, it's not like a dependency, I imagine. It wasn't some plugin that to keep up to date. It was just badly developed API.
Yeah, it's just basic human error, right?
That's it.
Yeah.
And I think like a lot of the times, like say like a login page for a website is probably the most secure page they will have because it's where everyone thinks is going to be the target. But when I'm looking to hack a website, it's usually after work when like when kids are in bed and I have some free time, which is rare. So I have to use that time wisely.
Yeah, some of us go to the gym or exercise or whatever. You just go and try and look for vulnerabilities in websites.
I exercise my mind.
Yeah.
So yeah, I wouldn't waste time with like the heavily trafficked sections of a website, like a login page or like a home page or something. I'll go straight to looking for what I deem to be the like the less trafficked, possibly older functionality of a website that hasn't been kept up to date or was maybe rushed out or simply less cared about by developers.
Yep.
And that's probably where I'll find, if I'm going to find anything, it's probably where I'll find something.
So that sort of leads into what I was going to ask you next around, like, what is the mindset of when if you're looking at a website or whatever and you've done that, you've tested it on our internal stuff, what's the process that you go through to, like, how do you find vulnerabilities? Where do you sort of, the common things that come up, like, just take us through. What is that mindset? What does that process look like?
Well, because I'm limited on time for what is a hobby, like I said, I'm not going to waste too much. What I think is wasting time looking at what I think is the heavily trafficked parts of a website. Because I imagine if you have decent developers, and if it's a functional website, I guess you've got decent developers.
Yep.
That's probably where they're going to spend the most time. It's where the most updates are made, where the most eyes on the code are. So probably where it's least vulnerable. So in order to try and speed up things and actually look for parts of a system or service that are likely most vulnerable, I tend to skip the main website itself. Like I'll look for
something else on that domain.
That's it.
Yeah.
You can, like, there's tools where you can do like even subdomain brute force essentially, where you can, if you might have like www.company.com, but you might also happen to have a publicly accessible www.dev.company.com. That's just a way to share links with external developers or something on a VPN to show what the development of what's happening on the company website, future releases. So you might have brand new functionality and that's still being worked on. That could be more vulnerable than anything else. Or like a shared hosting environment, which is sort of common with smaller businesses, I guess.
Yep.
If you don't want to have to pay for a dedicated server, you might pay a hosting company to which puts your company website on a server with tens or more other 10, 20, it could be hundreds of servers if they're low trafficked.
And you just got to find a vulnerability in one of those.
That's it. You can, just using a search engine, you can search the IP of the host and it'll return a list of all the other domains on that same host. You go into one of those websites. If they're vulnerable, you can start executing code on the host. And then you just got to sort of find some sort of privilege escalation of vulnerability to get out of what's usually some sort of containerized, with some web services, you can run websites as a specific user, and that user can't read the data of the other website, the other user. So you got to escalate privileges to get past that user. Sometimes they will just run as the same user, and there's nothing else to do. You're already in. So just by finding another website on the same host, you might think your website's perfectly secure, but theirs isn't. And now someone's on the server reading your data.
Is that the same for these sort of drive-by sort of attacks that they would find like a dev environment or something and then get access to the main?
Possibly, yeah. I mean, if let's say you have a website on a server and I have a website on the server, mine's more secure than yours. You happen to be running some old dependency of some plugin that's got a publicly released exploit. You get attacked in a drive-by exploit, and your host, which is now our host, becomes hacked. Data on that host becomes encrypted. If we happen to be running as the same user because the hosting environment didn't really tweak things to that level, then your data is encrypted, my data is encrypted. Or it could be like a chained exploit where not only does it get on the host, but it then looks for ways automatically to again use any sort of known privilege escalation vulnerability to escalate privileges on the host.
Yep.
And even if we are running as different users, if it can escalate privileges, it now has the ability to access my and encrypt my data as well.
Yep.
So you being hacked means I get hacked.
Okay. So take us through, say you found something, you've got in through, you've found some domain, got into some site, you've realised there's some vulnerability there. What would you sort of do? What would be the next steps from there?
A lot of the time I just go, cool, done. That's it. Yeah, move on.
Yeah.
Well,
if you're going to do it from a point of view, you wanted to test, like what you did for our internal stuff, like you wanted to test how secure our environment is, what would be the sort of the things you'd go through from there?
Once I get to a point where I can perhaps execute code on the server, which is what I did for our side, right? Went from having a public-facing website to being able to get in and access, execute code on the server. That to me is like job done.
Mm-hmm.
I could have then looked for ways to escalate privileges on the host, maybe get further into the internal network to find other hosts that perhaps aren't publicly accessible.
Mm-hmm.
You might have something behind a VPN that isn't accessible to anyone else that isn't on the VPN. But if your web server happened to be connected to share resources, you can get through the VPN and connection, access the internal hosts.
Yep.
But once I get to the point where I can execute commands code on the server, I just think that's job done.
Yep.
But that's mainly because that's where my interest lies. It's in web, there's different classes of hacking, So there's people who will find kernel exploits in order to do these privilege escalation vulnerabilities. I'm higher up the stack. I like the web side of hacking.
Yep.
So hacking websites essentially. In this website I talked about originally, where you could sort of do these challenges, there were the lower level operating system type exploits, but it was always above my head.
Yeah.
And when it came to learning, like I said, you got to learn to program to get better at exploiting things. I chose learn PHP, not learn C, and get good at that sort of stuff.
Yeah, fair enough. All right. So say you're taking on a role, you're a new CTO or a CIO at some large business. Where would you start with security?
I think the main thing and the easiest thing to do is just try to keep dependencies up to date.
Mm-hmm.
That's number one. Like I said, there's services like GitHub's Dependabot, where as long as you maintain a manifest of what you're running, it will automatically tell you via pull request if there's updates available. It's a simple one to set up, and it's a big win.
Yep.
And then there's also other services I've been talking about dependencies, and when I said looking through different hosts on the same, different websites on the same host in order to try and find ways into the host. There's also, you might be a big enough company where you don't just have a single host, you have multiple hosts, but it's not easily discoverable. You might have a website that points to a single IP address, but you have 20 other IP addresses doing different things. You might have a database on one host, whatever it may be, on other hosts, CI environments like Jenkins or something.
Mm-hmm.
There was a talk from a person who created a tool called MassScan, where they had, it's on, I think it was a DEF CON or Black Hat conference. It's on YouTube. He talked about how he made this tool to easily mass scan the internet, put in the entire IP range, IP version 4 range. And he said he was getting emails from military saying, how did you discover this host? You shouldn't be communicating with this host. And it wasn't him targeting it, it was just his tool just scanning the internet within minutes.
Yep.
So you can of course do that to find other hosts that a company may own. So typically if you have multiple hosts, you might have them on the same IP subnet, right? So you can go to websites like Shodan, where you can just put in the IP subnet and it'll return the list of IPs, active known IPs on that subnet, and it comes back with some interesting information because it does a port scan, so it can say you've got this port open, this port open, this port open, you're running these services.
Yep.
That same website, Shodan, is one I know of that you can create an account, a business account, pay for it, and it'll give you alerts where you put in your your company's IPs, your company subnet, whatever, and it'll actively monitor it. So if you're networking, if you're a new startup or something, and you start off with one server, but the company grows, you need more servers. You might introduce your own sort of CI environments. You might host your own mail server, anything like that, on these different hosts. You can use something like Shodan to say monitor this IP subnet and tell me if any new ports become public, because some infra guy might have deployed a new service and forgot to firewall it off, or didn't realize it was publicly open. So you can use these companies, these products, to alert you if it says this is open and probably shouldn't be open.
Yep.
So
if there's any changes, then opens up a vulnerability, and then you can go in there.
That's it. So there's some products and tools you can use that will monitor your network and monitor your dependencies, essentially.
So if you're a large business, like, you could be using the same tools that the hackers are using, essentially. Just to make sure that you're checking.
That's it.
Okay.
Like I think Shodan started off as more of a tool for perhaps bad people to look at companies.
Now it's an enterprise
tool.
tool.
And they realised companies will pay them for the same information.
Yeah, okay. Don't have to steal their data and then getting paid them as payment up front. What about like the people side of it? So, there's things around updating, dependencies and that sort of thing. But like, how do you, if you've got a dev team, like, how do you sort of build into that dev team, the culture and processes around making sure they don't leave APIs open, or you just don't build something, leave some legacy there and move on, and then becomes vulnerable years later? Like, what do you do around that sort of people aspect to it?
In terms of keeping functionality up to date, I think it's like a common complaint in software development, is that like the business doesn't really care about maintaining working functionality. To them, it works.
Yep.
So why spend extra money in terms of development time on keeping it up to date?
Yeah.
So it can just sit there and
going back and dealing with tech debt and stuff
that's it.
like
There's
that.
There's new features to develop. You got to get things out the door. So the tech debt just accrues, right?
Yep.
So it's got to sort of come down from the top in that sense, where some time has to be spent and dedicated for maintaining tech debt.
Yep.
That would be one thing.
Yeah, it's common. We've seen it with large businesses where you might say allocate 70% of your time to new functionality, 10% to bugs, and 20% to dealing with tech debt, or something along those lines. Like, but just building it into your process, so it's not just build something, move on, forget about it. That you can keep on maintaining and updating it.
That's it.
And what about, how do you get people just to even just care about it? Because I can imagine, you're under pressure to build functionality. There's a way that you can do it. Well, there's multiple ways you can do it. So how do you get them to care enough to make sure that you're building it, it's still secure while you're delivering that functionality to the business?
I imagine deadlines have got to be one thing. If there's a short deadline and the company doesn't care about how it's done, they just want you to do it, then you might just try to do it the quickest and easier way without putting too much thought into it, just to satisfy the company. And that might not be the best way of doing it. So short deadlines can be an issue. And then in terms of developers actually caring about it, I think there just has to be an interest in it. Not possibly by everyone. Not everyone's going to share the same interest. But if you have a handful of people at a company who actually have an interest in security, then I would just make sure that at least one of those people are part of a code review, Get someone's eyes on the code review that happens to have more of an interest in looking out for these things.
So you give them some ownership over the security side of it, and
that's it.
Doing those checks, reviewing the code, making sure that it's secure and safe. Okay. If you were looking to get into cybersecurity as a dev, where would you start?
I follow a little bit of news in terms of what's happening, which is like it's a huge website, but I'll plug it, Reddit. There's like a Reddit, like a NetSec. If you go to like the subreddit NetSec, NETSEC, network security, there's always interesting, like that's where I found this curl information. I haven't really seen it anywhere else. It's not like it's making big news for what is potentially going to be a high severity vulnerability, but it's on like Reddit NetSec, right? So when I'm browsing Reddit, I check that out. It's some interesting I find interesting things popping up on there.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess if you don't care about it, you're not going to really follow that information. But one thing I could recommend, I guess, as a way to try and care about it, is companies do have like bug bounty programs.
Mm-hmm.
There's I think it's called HackerOne, where you can just sign up as anyone, a free account, and they give you a list of websites who are a part of the the system.
Yep.
Where you can they say, if you hack me, you find this sort of level of vulnerability, we'll pay you $500 or pay you $1,000.
Yep. How many of those are you won?
I don't have that. I've never actually tried, because like I said, in my mind, I don't have that much time to dedicate to it.
Yeah.
And I always figure there's so many other people looking at these websites, it's unlikely I'll find something.
Yeah. Okay.
Someone else has probably already found it.
Yep.
But then again, like you hear news, like I'll follow it because I'm interested in it, and I'll think that sounds like an easy thing to have found.
Yeah.
I could have found that.
Yeah, I could have
like
got
he just got lucky.
$500.
Yeah, he got paid that. So yeah.
So it sounds like like if you're a CTO or CIO, probably a good starting point just to keep on top of what's happening is basically find the tools and resources that hackers are accessing. So, whatever these Reddit subthreads are, there's news and resources out there, some tools that are scanning the internet. If you sort of just, sort of immerse yourself in that, utilize what's already out there and just be in the same space that the hackers are, then that's going to help you keep on top of if there's any new vulnerabilities or anything else you should be considering. Fair assessment?
Yeah, that's it. And I mean, and companies also have, a lot of companies, it seems it's becoming more and more popular is to have these sort of they call it the hacker events, but it's not really hacking. It's to just hack together some sort of new technology, some sort of new functionality, some sort of new product idea, and it's like a weekend event or something. But in my mind, if you actually had every now and then an actual internal hacker event,
go and see if you can,
some sort of incentive to try and break internal tools, and from a public perspective. Then of course you have your team trying to break your own code.
Yeah, and
I think who's the best to do it? If they wrote the code, they must think, I know where a vulnerability is.
I think with that comes
bad job.
You got to have a strong culture though, because you don't want to go and you want people to be open to hey, there's a vulnerability here, and you don't want it to come down as oh, you stuffed up, you made a mistake. You might have written that code, right?
That's it.
So that comes down to making sure you've got the right culture in place that, hey, we all care about it. It doesn't really matter who wrote it. We just want to make sure that we're safe and that we can deal with it.
That's it. I mean, you can either have someone find it who works for you and is willing to show it to you, or someone find it because you're part of one of these bug bounty programs and you're going to pay them for the information, or you can have someone find it who is going to use it for bad purposes, right?
And
that's it.
Trying to get ransom to you.
You'd rather have someone find it and tell you about it.
Yeah. If you did have one of these attacks, what are your options? Or what can you do about it? Pray that you got a backup of your
Basically,
data?
Yeah. I think backup's number one.
Yep.
I mean, that's for any purpose. The host could just simply die because it's on dodgy hardware,
Yeah.
and you just lose your database. I think backups are always number one for any
daily
purpose.
Backups?
I guess it comes down to you will know your data better than anyone else,
yeah.
right? Yeah. Like if you have a database that isn't updated or is very rarely trafficked, you could have it a once a week. But if you're a big company, you might have hourly.
Yeah, if you've got hundreds of transactions going through there a day or whatever.
That's
it is.
Yeah.
Yep.
So backups.
That's the best.
Offsite backups.
If you get attacked, the best thing is if you've got a backup, you can restore it.
That's it.
And then you just got to deal with the fact if that data gets out, what impact does that have on your business in terms of how personal it is? Some of the data might not actually matter to anyone else. It just matters to your company.
That's it, yeah.
Anything else? So backups, number one?
I think so. I mean, first you got to keep your dependencies up to date, monitor your network. Like I said, there's tools like Shodan. There's things like Dependabot. So you've got these tools available to help you keep as much of your network and dependencies and whatnot secure as possible.
Yep.
But yeah, once you're hacked, it's pretty well blow everything away and start again.
Yep.
If someone has the ability to execute code on your server, you can't just patch the hole. You have to assume the whole server's compromised and rebuild it. Dump the operating system, rebuild it. I mean, even now, there's news coming out of both Intel and what's the AMD? What's the other processor? AMD, yeah? Intel and AMD. I think it's AMD.
Beyond me.
But they're like, you're getting like processor level hacks where like the processor itself can be compromised. So it gets to a point where you might have to just throw away the hardware itself if you get hacked and start again from scratch.
Yeah, right.
So once someone's in, you just have to assume they're in and they're going to stay in.
Yep.
So the best you can do is
shut it down, restore it somewhere else, and
spin up a new server, restore it back up.
Yep.
And make sure however they got in is plugged.
Yeah. Okay. Hey, so I think we're sort of running out of time. Is there any last tips? Anything else you want to say before we wrap things up?
I mean, like hacking for me is fun. It's like I said, it's like a Sudoku. A bit more fun. So I recommend, if any of this sounds interesting, try it out. I started because I Googled how to hack.
Yeah.
It's
and no one came knocking on your door.
No. Like always for fun. I never took it too far.
Yeah. Did you in your Google? Did you say I'm just doing this for fun?
In case there's eyes on it.
Yeah.
But it's fun. Take a look. There's websites you can sign up to. There's bug bounty programs you can play with. There's companies who want you to hack them and they'll pay you to do it.
Well, I think it sounds like if you were a large business or any business out there and you've got relying on software systems on the internet, that you should look into it and you should just try and get across like what hackers are using, what tools, what resources, so then you know how you get best to protect yourself. That's
it. Like at first it might seem like you're dumping some money into things that have never been an issue for you, but the day it becomes an issue will probably be the day you regret not having spent. Exactly.
Yes, good point. All right. Well, thanks, Kane. And on that note, look, I hope you found that useful. I found it interesting. I've known Kane for a long time. I've known him for a long time, but there's definitely some stuff I learned. If you want to, give us some feedback, some comments, put it in wherever you're watching this. If it's on LinkedIn or YouTube or wherever. Or if you feel like getting in touch with us, just hit us up at hello@horizondigital.au. Happy to chat more, answer any questions, or just welcome any feedback. So look out for the next interview. Not sure who that's going to be with soon. Well, we've got a couple lined up, but we'll let you know. And once again, thanks, Kane. It's good having you.
Thank
you. I hope you guys found that interesting.